We are back with another episode of Detroit Sports Talk. Yesterday, we went over the Detroit Red Wings season, finally got into our first topic dealing with the Red Wings. Just overall, we generalized or summarized how well they did, looked at offense, defense, looked at a bunch of statistics. And today, we are actually going to rebuild for next season. So not a ton of cap space to play with. You've got two massive extensions to give out to your restricted free agents. Stevie Y is going to have his hands full this summer. So let's get into what we think Stevie Y should be doing to rebuild the Detroit Red Wings.
And there's the snap. Blitz comes. Mayfield back. Loads. Throws. Picked up by the Lions. Intercepted by the Lions. Intercepted by the Lions. Derek Barnes. Derek Barnes. Derek Barnes. Reggie Miller. And it's blocked again. What a block.
Lead pass in for Larkin. In space for Raymond. And he scores! Lucas Raymond!
Welcome back to Detroit Sports Talk. I'm your host, Bobby Buckets, and I want to thank you for taking the time to talk some Detroit sports today. Be sure to like the show, subscribe to the channel, comment below your thoughts on today's topics, and reach out to me on Twitter at Bobby Buckets. Now, we did not wrap up the Western Conference Finals last night. The T-Wolves actually snuck a game in and were able to steal one in Dallas, going back to Minnesota for Game 5 tomorrow. Dallas is still up 3-1. Nobody has ever come back from an 0-3 series. So it's still looking like the Mavericks are going to win this one. We'll find out tomorrow. And the Tigers with a doubleheader today after being postponed yesterday. So 2 games against the Pirates today. Got a lot going on. I haven't been paying attention to playoff hockey, and I realize maybe I should be making announcements on this, especially if we're going to be talking Red Wings hockey on this. So I'm going to have to take a glance tonight and see where those playoffs are at. Playoff hockey is amazing. So is playoff basketball. For some reason, I am only paying attention to playoff basketball and nothing about playoff hockey. But this has given me good incentive to get into the hockey scene. As I was going through this, started thinking about like, hey, what free agents could they go after? And I don't know. I don't know who's on other teams. I don't know who's about to be a free agent. So, frankly, this was a good deep dive on the Red Wings roster. I feel very knowledgeable in terms of NBA like roster building, in terms of cap management. I feel a little less in regards to the NFL when it comes to the Lions. Hockey, don't have a clue. I didn't even know how much cap space the Wings had. I didn't know what the cap was at. I did learn that it's growing like the NBA is growing. Now, the NBA contracts are absurd compared to hockey contracts where you got people not even making over $1 million. So we're gonna dive deep into that. I'll share my screen again and kind of we'll take a look at everything. And I'm doing no script on this. So again, the hardest part is the planning part, is going through the script. Because I went through and kind of made a spreadsheet, that's what I want to go off of. And we're just going to go off of the dome of things that I thought of while I was making it, and we'll see if I can remember. So let's get to it. All right, so the first thing that I want to do is just take a look at the roster that we had last year, and then we're going to take a look at those players on which line that they played on, and then their contract as well. So the big pending issue, and I wouldn't even say it's an issue, is going to be Raymond as a restricted free agent. He is going to get paid to this offseason. You've got Dylan Larkin locked up as your captain for the next 7 years. He is the most expensive player on the team at $8.7 million per year, followed up by Cat. 3 years left, just under $8 million. So DeBrincat and Larkin are going to be here for the foreseeable future. Raymond also should be. Restricted free agency isn't a big deal. You know that you're going to bring him back. It's just a matter of what you're going to bring him back at. Now, what I've looked into is that maybe Lucas, and honestly, as we move to the right, Mo is in the same boat. You've got $28 million in cap space. Mo and Raymond are going to take up most of it. So you've got to pay those two guys. Mo is going to be your top defensive guy. Played the most minutes on your team. Are you looking at a Jack Hughes kind of deal where he comes out at 8 years, $8 million per year, and you lock him up? Same thing with Raymond. Is he looking at an 8 for 8 or a 7 for 7? But I think the big thing with both Mo and Raymond is I would get those deals figured out right away. Even if, honestly, if I'm Raymond or Mo, I'm probably taking a 4-year deal, a 5-year deal to where I can re-up again afterwards, as opposed to taking a Larkin kind of deal. Now, the more years you take, usually the more money you're going to get per year. So is it in Yzerman's advantage to take a lower deal with a lower AAV? Because your cap space is kind of tight, especially with those two. So it just makes it tricky. Yzerman's got a lot of work to do. And when you've got deals like Sherratt over here, you've got 2 years left. I don't think you want Sherratt as one of your line 1 guys, but maybe he's a line 2 guy, a line 3 guy. But he's making almost $5 million per year the next 2 years. Moving on to line 2, you've got 2 unrestricted free agents in Perron and Patrick Kane. And again, after your 2 restricted free agents, he's probably the top guy that you're looking at as to whether or not he is going to come back. But you paid Comfort recently. He's at 4 years, just over $5 million. I mean, I don't think he's going over or going anywhere on a 4-year deal. You kind of plan that he's going to stick around. Looking at the second line for the defense, Edvinsson came up the last several games of the season and played well. So you got to imagine that he is here to stay. And honestly, maybe he's moving up to line 1 where you're playing Edvinsson on the left side, Seider on the right side. And that is your defense, your line 1 defense of the future. Petry, he's a little older. And frankly, is he your 3rd most expensive contract? I think he is. So with Petry, you've got 1 year left on his deal. This is probably one of those that you just hold on to him, and then you got $6 million coming off the books next year. So I don't know who else pairs up on this side. But let's move to line 3 for the forwards. You got Robbie Fabry, 1 year left. You went and paid Kopp. Recently, he's got 3 years left at a little more than $5.5 million. Fisher was that 1 year deal at 1.125. That's a good kind of deal that maybe Stevie Y looks at moving forward as somebody to bring on, or just the kind of deal you need a one gap stopper, somebody to just come in, cheap deal, fill your role, and then try to fill it with somebody long-term next year. You've got Olli Maatta in line 3, also with Gostisbehere. Now, Maatta, he's got 1 year left, $3 million. That could be a very tradable contract if you wanted to look to move him to improve the defense. And then Gostisbehere is a UFA after making, I want to say, about $4 million. So he was expensive, but he was a great offensive defenseman. He's not a great defensive defenseman. So I wonder if Gostisbehere goes elsewhere, chooses to get paid, and then you bring back somebody who really plays defense or focuses on the defensive side of the puck more so than the offensive side from a defensive position. Looking at line 4, you've got to re-sign Veleno as well. Zarnik, UFA, he's gone. Sprong, he was only making $2 million, but as a 4th line guy, I'm not sure if you're bringing Sprong back either. You've really got 10 roster spots on here total that you need to fill. You've only got $28 million in cap space. Is 15 million of that, more than half of that, going towards just 2 guys in Mo and Lucas? And then you've got to fill 8 roster spots with the remaining cap space of 11 million. It's just going to be tough to do. Your goalies, another questionable spot. Husso hurt majority of the year, making just under $5 million. And then Alex Lyon. Frankly, Lyon brings the most bang for your buck. He was essentially your starter this year and made just under $1 million. You bring him back. He's got 1 more year left on his deal. From everything I've read, there are not any top tier free agent goalies out there. If anything, you'd have to bring one back in a trade. So I just don't know if you might have to run it back with this same group and hope that Husso can stay healthy and can be the guy that you thought he was when you traded for him and then extended him. Lyon, I think you keep on as kind of that Band-Aid piece of somebody who's cheap. You're not paying him a ton, and then he can come in. He started 40 games or played in 45 games, something like that. And, so you don't have to overextend him. Hopefully, Reimer as a UFA, he's most likely gone. And so I think the biggest thing, and I'm going to scroll over here so we can look at the side of this, and that's you've got a guy in waiting in Kosa. So 2 years, he's making less than Lyon is. I wonder. I guess let's work backwards now and let's start rebuilding. I guess before we get into that, I think you need to have a youth movement in Detroit. You have a ton of great prospects playing with the Griffins or playing in the minors that based on the tightness in cap space that you have from going out and paying Kopp, going out and paying JT, you've got a couple of defensive contracts that aren't great, like Justin Hall, that you probably need to work with a buyout in or trade. So there's some work that can be done to open up some more cap space. But just because you're in such a tough spot, you probably need to have a youth movement in Detroit and bring up some of those young offensive guys who can try to fill in at the wing positions or the forward spots. Do the same thing with Sebastian. Make him your third guy, run it back with Husso and Lyon, and hope that you can at least provide some competent play from the goalie position, and you're doing it at a relatively cheap market. If eventually you realize that, hey, we need an upgrade next year, after next year, and Husso and Lyon aren't going to get it done, you then have the money to either go out and get a guy, trade for a guy, and actually make a real difference at the goalie position. Just based on the current cap situation, I think you're okay for this year. I would bring in Sebastian just in case, you could hand him a handful of games this year, get him some PT, see how he does. Maybe he's a guy who can step in as number 2 and you bring in a number 1, or maybe he is your number 1 moving forward. Since we're just looking backwards, we're going to move backwards in this case. I want to look at in line 4 for our forwards, what kind of guys that we can bring back here. And the big thing I think is Berggren is going to be a guy that has to move up. He's going to be on the team next year, so he's going to be a cheap guy that you can bring up. Can he take one of those forward spots? Can he replace Sprong? Can he replace Fisher? Soderblom, you probably need to bring Soderblom up, get him some reps at a line 3 forward, a line 4 forward, getting him on the wings. Mazur, you've got Mazur waiting in the wings. We haven't even gotten to probably the 2 strongest guys up top, but my point here is you have wings waiting in Grand Rapids, waiting in the minors that you could bring up, not have to pay them anything. You've already got them on their rookie contracts. You've already got them to deals to where you're not spending free agency money, where you can use that money to maybe go get a top tier defenseman, maybe go get a top 6 forward, maybe bring back Patrick Kane. I know the big thing with Kane is he's had a 3-year, he's looking for term as opposed to money. We only paid him about $2.5 million. So I think the reason why I think a youth movement needs to happen in Detroit is because you have such a great prospect system that you should be playing some of these guys, bringing them up to where can you get halfway decent production on a cheap contract where you're getting a lot bigger improvement either on the defensive side if you bring in a defensive guy, a top 2, a top 4 defensive guy, to where you can improve your defense and hopefully not lose out so much on the offensive side. Now, they were a top 3 efficiency team in shooting percentage, so you can expect some regression. They're not going to be that good offensively again. So is it better to try to improve defensively and try to be at least a decent team offensively by playing your young guys? I personally think that's the way to go. Now, if you're looking up here at the defensive side, you've got Jake Wallman. He played decently. He could be a third line guy. Maybe you even move Sherratt down. You've got Wallman who could play with Mata. You could put Mata up here with Petrie. You could put Edvinsson up at the top with Seider. So I think Wallman maybe stays. You could move Mata if you wanted to, but I think Justin Hall, most of all, you've got to get off that deal. Whether you trade him, whether you get a buyout, somehow, some way, you need to create more cap space, because this guy was getting healthy scratches. He was watching from the press box at the end of the year when you had your most exciting game. So Justin Hall needs to go. So I'm not sure what you do on the defensive side. You've got Wallman that you could move in. Johansson has to move up. Frankly, if you're going to play these guys, I don't know if you can even go out and get a top defenseman, because you have to make room. You have to make room for these guys to come in to be and just to see if they're ready to play. So Gostisbehere, I think he's gone. And at $4 million, if you can replace him with Wallman, with Johansson moving up, Edvinsson moving up to the top guy. You even got Emil Viro. He's got 1 year left in the minors. Maybe you keep him down there and bring him up next year with Johansson, and a similar kind of deal where he's no longer waiver eligible. So the defense, it's interesting. You have to improve, but also Johansson has to move up. You have to get off Justin Hall. There's got to be room for Jake Wallman. You got to move Edvinsson to probably line 1, playing next to Mo. So you already have guys in waiting in Johansson and Wallman. I wonder, do you spend money here, or do you spend that money and go pay Patrick Kane? Do you give him a 3-year, $6 million AAV and sign him for 3 years, $18 million? Because at that point, I guess my reasoning is going all in on Kane is you saw how well he played, how many points he could put up per game. It's just very hard to find somebody to do that. So I would say pay Kane at 3 years. He's moving up to 39, 40 years old at the end of that deal. But in the wings, man, I think that's the most important part. Having Patrick Kane, having Dylan Larkin, DeBrincat, Raymond as all 4 of these guys that your guys in the wings can learn from. So, are you bringing up Danielson, Casper, Mazur? Do you bring up all 3 of those guys? You don't even have to play them at center. You can play them at the wing and just get them up to speed with the NHL play. And so, frankly, look at all the people waiting in the wings on the offensive side of the puck. I mean, I think Stevie Y got himself into a messy situation from a cap space standpoint when you're paying JT this much money with that amount of term, with that many years on the deal. Same thing with Copp. They've both been fine, but you're paying your third line center $5.5 million, whereas could you get slightly less production at a much cheaper cost by bringing in some of these guys in the minors? So I'm of the opinion what I would do if I was Stevie Y is I would pay Kane. And I know it's going to make it tough down the road if he ages poorly, but you have to go out, pay Raymond, you have to pay Mo. I would pay Kane and keep him so that you can have a top 6 guy that you can rely on. And then also he's a mentor for all the young guys that you're going to bring up. So, with that $28 million in cap space, more than half of it's going to Lucas and Mo. So that means you have to fill in. I mean, let's say total they're going to get $15 million. Let's say one's going to get $8 million per year, one's going to get $7 million. You have then $13 million to fill out 8 more roster spots, and that's a very, very difficult thing to do, and it makes it a lot easier if you're going to bring up your youth guys. So let's say we give 15, 16 million and you have 12 million left over. You can give half of that to Patrick Kane, and then you have 7 more roster spots that you have to fill with a very limited amount of money left over. So with those spots, you have to bring in your cheaper guys. You can move up of Justin Hall, maybe move him in a trade with a draft pick, take on somebody else who's more expensive but a better defensive player. That's another way that you could fill out the rest of your cap space. But most of all, I think, and this was my first, honestly, just dissecting the Red Wings roster in general, as opposed to just looking at it from a cap space perspective as well. You don't have a lot of room to play with. I would pay Raymond, I would pay Mo, and I would pay Patty Kane, and then I would bring in your young guys. Fill in the young guys with those empty spots in line 3, line 4. Let them come up, let them learn from Patrick, Dylan, get them the most NHL experience that they can, because really your cap space looks a lot better next year than it does this year. You're getting off Petrie's deal. You're getting off your goalies deal. You're getting off Robbie Fabry's deal. So I think there is some room that you can make, and you have room that you can play with next year as well. Even if you don't have to answer all those questions this year, and you wouldn't be by bringing up the young guys. So I'll end this rebuild of the 2024 Detroit Red Wings by saying, pay Raymond whatever he wants, pay Mo whatever he wants. If you can lock them up for 6, 7, 8 years in the future, do it. And I would also bring back Patrick Kane, give him a 3-year deal with $6 million AAV, give him the term and the money that he's looking for, and let him be, one, that productive piece that you know he can be on the ice, even if he's in his higher 30s. And then also at the same time, you then have the ability to bring your young guys up, start getting them some NHL minutes. And then once you go through that offseason, if your young guys are not stepping up like you hoped, you then have your weaknesses pointed out that you can then upgrade the next year. So pay your main guys, bring up the young guys. Let's have a youth movement in Detroit until we can get that cap space in a better situation, and then you upgrade your goalie spot next year. That's going to be it for this episode of Detroit Sports Talk. I want to thank you guys for taking the time to talk some Detroit sports today. Be sure to like the show, subscribe to the channel, comment below to share your thoughts. How would you build the Detroit Red Wings? And also be sure to follow me on Twitter at Bobby Buckets. Thanks again for taking the time to tune in, and I'll see you guys on the next episode. Peace.